Welcome to the Washdown Podcast, episode 150. That's right, the big 150. And on tonight's episode, we have retired law enforcement officer John Howe. Now, John was medically retired for PTSD. I highly encourage you to listen to his story. He is starting Healing Trails Overland, and I will let him tell you all about that. We did a pretty good job of covering it in the podcast. So I hope you enjoy it. I hope you learn something from it. Here is the Washdown Podcast, episode 150 with John Howe.
All crews stand by for emergency traffic. All crews stand by for emergency traffic.
That's the unit with the Mayday. Go ahead with your traffic.
Can go in chronological order. However you feel like is going to be the best impact and get your story across.
Interesting. Okay.
We're giving you options, so don't mess it up.
Yeah, I'm not used to those. Being a cop for 24 years, you don't have options. Yeah, we'll start at the beginning. So I'm 47, and almost 2 years ago now, I got medically retired from Independence, Missouri Police, 24 years of service. And man, you try to prepare for something like this, and then you realize you can't. And the thing I've been saying for a while now is I'm trying to form my thoughts, man. I was a cop for 24 years. During that 24 years, unfortunately, there was a lot of trauma. And I ended up getting retired as a result of that. I retired, and man, my life turned upside down. I had always preached, I think it was 2018 or 2019, I taught to all of the police department in the following year, all the fire department at Independence, building resilience, surviving secondary trauma. And I always preached that you can't let this be your identity. And I had photography that was my identity.
Mm-hmm.
And then you get medically retired. You have your last day that you didn't know was your last day. And you realize you don't know anything. And so the things I can say is this: I am not a good man, but I have a good heart. I've always had a good heart. When I retired, I was lost, man. I didn't have a purpose anymore. I jumped into CrossFit. I'd never done CrossFit. I was heavy my whole life. And the gym owner there, man, he saw something in me, asked me if I wanted to start coaching, and it was perfect. I didn't have a purpose, so that was my purpose. I went all in. Man, I was productive.
You drank the Kool-Aid, didn't you?
I did. I would say about this time last year, February, March, I tore my rotator cuff on my right shoulder. And I reasoned it away. It's just a sprain. It's whatever. It kept getting worse. I finally went to an ortho, and he's like, you got a full tear. We got to do surgery. Here's your options. And I'm like, I got a CrossFit competition coming up like this weekend. Am I cool? And he's like, I can't tell you what to do, man, but either way, you're going to have surgery, either immediate or not. So I went ahead and did it. And I went to Sedalia, and I did Festivus. I won Masters Age Division, and I ended up when they posted it, I was 10th in the US, which for me was a huge thing, but it was so incredibly stupid. So I had my first rotator cuff surgery and June 2nd of last year. And when I woke up, things were wrong. I'm going to segue, if we can come back to this for a second.
Sure.
I'm sure every other first responder veteran on here is told the same thing, but the majority of our community has childhood traumas, and it propels us to do what we do. I had that. I had sexual abuse and physical abuse growing up, and kind of realized that my childhood was stolen from me. And so I propelled into this policing, and back in that day, you had to put yourself through the police academy. I was in the police academy. I tested for Kansas City. The recruiter calls me back. We get the written test, the physical agility. I run those. Man, I smoked it. I was doing great. He called me back after the World Board and he's like, "You're white and you're straight. You're not going to get hired." This is 98 on the phone. Wow. Okay. Well, I'd also applied at Independence. I got hired in Independence, and that was my home for the next 24 years. And I gave it everything I had. As a result of that, I got divorced after 20 years. I have 2 adult children who don't talk to me right now. Yeah, so I've had quite the mental health journey. I don't know where to go from here, man.
Well, why don't we talk about what you're doing now? So, and we'll come back to, the inpatient thing, the Charlie who's hiding under the table.
Sound asleep.
We'll talk about him a little bit. But like, what is your purpose now? What are you doing now?
So my wife and I, as a result of a settlement with the city, I was able to invest some money into a business my wife started. It's called Healing Trails Overland. And essentially I'm low paid talent, and I'm going to drive around North America and go on a healing journey. I have never road tripped on my own. I've tent camped twice, so this is insane, but we're investing quite a bit of money into being a self-contained vehicle with my history. I've owned Howe Creative Photo since 12 or 13 years now. I really took a liking to photography, and I ended up becoming the Mavericks team photographer. And so I've shot Royals games for the Examiner. I've had a lot of amazing experiences with photography. And a couple of years ago, I was on patrol several years ago, and I remember it was over 100 that day, and I'm over off Chrysler, and I see this old man mowing his grass, and I think he was 88. His name was Robert Becker. I stopped because he's an old man out in the heat, and I just started talking to him, and I found out his son was a musician, had gotten on somewhere and couldn't mow his grass anymore. So I started mowing for him that summer just because, well, it's a long history, but it was the right thing to do. And I'd been doing photography and getting into studio work, and I asked him to take a portrait. And so I took a portrait, and I kind of interviewed him about his service. And then that led to the next one, to the next one. During that time, I interviewed 54 World War II veterans. I photographed each of them. As a way to say thank you for their service, I would go back, edit the print. I'd send it to H&H out in Raytown, which is a phenomenal lab. I'm not sponsored or anything else. They're just amazing people out there. And they'd print it, mount it. I'd pick it up. I'd take it to the veteran. And I was able to see such joy in their hearts. And the reason I'm talking about this is because I'm going to incorporate something like this into Healing Trails Overland. But I learned so many lessons by talking to the greatest generation and hearing their stories. Man, I got 2 weeks before we went on a high school band trip to Pearl Harbor. I was able to interview a Pearl Harbor survivor, photograph him. My son listened to the interview. So 2 weeks later, we're standing in Pearl Harbor and talking about what he had said, what he had seen. It was very impactful. So what I decided is, 100%, I'm going to start talking about my experiences as a police officer, because we've got to get the word out there that right now we have a society where we know that military and first responders are in jobs that are going to cause trauma. For first responders, there's no plan in place on how to deal with that. And I encountered that in June when I had to, in August when I had to go inpatient. And so Healing Trails Overland, what we're going to do is I'm going to go out and I'm going to talk to people. I'm going to tell them the story of me and my travels with my dog, who is adorable. He's not smart, but he's adorable.
Well, God, don't give with both hands.
Yeah, that's true. And we're going to travel and heal. If along the way, we're working out all the details, but I'm going to start storytelling about veterans and first responders. And what I want to talk about is the gap story. Everybody on social media wants to hear the sexy stuff that got them to where they're at. They don't talk about what happened when you come home from war, when you come home from that call, when you come home from the fire department and you have to deal with your life. And then, like you said, the wheels fall off. What did that look like? And how did you come back from that? And it's going to give me the opportunity to lean into other people's practices, try things for myself. I may not like it, but I want to start establishing a comprehensive list for first responders, police and fire, not just police, not just fire, where it's stuff I've gone to and I can vouch for. It may not be for you, but the first story I'm going to tell is a veteran, and it's a very compelling story. We're going to go out for 3 to 5 days and drive somewhere overland, camp. Before the end of the trip, I'm going to do a portrait and commemorate their service. And then we get done with that. We come back. I'm going to use H&H because they're just amazing people. And I'm going to print it, have it framed, take it to them. That's my way to continue to serve.
So are you going to videotape these conversations or like post them on YouTube? Or...
Yeah. So we've secured all the social media, Healing Trails Overland. We've got a website that's under construction right now. My wife stood up the business. We've got insurance. We've got everything. We're just literally waiting on March 6th. I start my build. And we're going to video everything. The main platform is going to be YouTube. And I don't know where it's going to go, honestly. And I'm open to that.
Well, it sounds like a fantastic idea, but I do have a question. Why a Ford Ranger?
So when I retired, a gift to myself was the 2022 Ford Ranger. And I had no plans for overlanding. I had never bought a brand new vehicle, and this thing was practical. It had less than 1,000 miles. Some old man had it, and it was beautiful. And I love the look. And fast forward to last May, and I had been working on getting a service dog for a while. I had another organization that completely crapped all over me with it. And I ended up finding Missouri Patriot Paws. And Missouri Patriot Paws is a program that helps veterans and first responders. And they essentially, a trainer who's a peer trainer would train me to train my dog. And so we started May of last year. I had like 1 week of training, and then I had rotator cuff surgery. So I had to figure out how to do all this training with a dog that wasn't trained. Like he would sometimes sit when I told him to.
It's like James.
Yeah. I had to figure out, well, the first thing I figured out was I was getting pissed off, and I had to figure out my own shit because it had nothing to do with the dog. I wasn't explaining it in a clear enough way. And then one of my first thoughts when I had that, and I had that realization was, my God, how many times does this happen with policing? Where we're not explaining it the way we need to explain it for that person. And so I started training him, and man, it was challenging. But we bonded. And fast forward to, I have my surgery June 2nd, and my wife goes and sees a therapist. We later found out this. His daughter had a surgery where when she woke up, she was in a trauma response, and it took her about 2 years to come back from that. Well, take that same situation, June 2nd, and it happened to me. I wake up in a trauma response because of a sexual assault when I was a child. And I wake up to a male nurse holding my genitalia, trying to help me pee. And I started swinging because I thought I was there. My brain wouldn't go out of the amygdala. I went to my therapist. I went to my counselor. Between June 2nd and July 12th, the most sleep I got in a 24-hour period was 3 hours. I wasn't eating. I would throw up. My brain was jacked. My wife realized, and some friends at the time realized, like, he needs to go inpatient. And so I did. And I get back from inpatient, and I'd done so many other programs. I didn't feel like I'd walked away with some golden nugget. My brain was still messed up. So through friends and research and everything else, my wife actually found ketamine infusions. And man, that was a lot to consider, because being a cop, the whole "this is your brain on drugs" propaganda that went on, all of that, it was a hard choice. I did my research. I listened to Andrew Huberman's podcast, and I knew what I was getting into. So I dove into it with the intentionality of finally facing all my shit and healing. And that's what I've been doing since getting back late September of last year. I've been figuring that out.
Did anybody ever talk to you about the stellate ganglion block?
No.
So that's something that you might want to research.
Okay.
It basically helps your body get out of that fight or flight. So it's usually like I can't remember. It's 2 different type of drugs or whatever, but it's like Novocaine and something else. It's like a pain reliever or whatever, and it gets injected. And yeah.
How long does it last?
So for some people, not long, like a couple months. Some people it lasts years. It just kind of depends.
Yeah.
It's one of those things, everybody's different. You know, you go do EMDR and it's the best thing ever for this person, but then this other person is like, no, that's terrible. Yeah. Talk therapy is where it's at. And then, no, it's neurofeedback, or no, it's experiential, blah, 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 blah. You go down the rabbit hole, and ultimately not everything's going to work for everybody.
Yeah.
The key is keep trying until you find something that does work for you.
Right. That's the hardest thing, is because, where to begin with this? So January of 22, I was working. September of that prior year, I got married. And this is after a 20-year marriage and a divorce. And we went on our honeymoon. We went to Greece. It was an amazing time. We get back. 3 days later, Blaze is killed. And I was there at the hospital, processed the scene, dealt with all that. And I knew in that moment I was done. My brain could not take it anymore. I'd been on scene St. Patty's Day of 2001, right after Terry got murdered. And looking back on that now, I don't blame anybody. I'm not mad at anybody. Things have to change, because St. Patty's Day 2001, Terry was 3 weeks from retirement, and pretty traumatic how he died. And my ex-wife, to this day, will tell you, when I came home that next morning, I was a completely different person. He got shot and killed. We remained on scene for hours. And finally, they send us to the PD, and they're like, go up to the 2nd floor conference room, which is the commander's conference room, which you never went in unless you're in trouble. And we didn't think we were in trouble, but it was not a comfortable place. We get up there, and an old Vietnam vet came in and was just basically like, in Vietnam, I lost a lot of guys. Shit happens, suck it up. And
Best speech ever. Write that one down, folks.
By the way, we're in there like 2 to 3 minutes and we're in shock. And this sergeant, I don't remember who, he comes in and my dog's moving around. He's getting pissed. I'm not getting mad. It hurts thinking of how ignorant we were. Sergeant comes in and he looks at me and another officer and he goes, guys, go be 2-man until day shift comes in. Everybody's drunk, so we can't get anybody in early. So go ride 2-man. So we get in a police car and we literally went to the Quick Trip at 23rd and Noland and we stood there. And back then they had the magazine stands and we're like nervously thumbing through magazines, not wanting to go on any calls. Thank God we didn't. I finally walked. I was supposed to be off at 3 a.m. that morning. I walked in my house. I was thinking about this earlier. It was after 6:30 a.m. And when I left work, we started at 3 p.m. They're like, see you guys back at 3. So I go home. I've got a newborn. I can't sleep because my friend, Terry, was like, he was that old guy that talked to you when nobody else did because you had to prove yourself. You had to be, I say you have to, it used to be, you had to be in a life-threatening situation on your own and prove you can handle it. Yeah. Terry wasn't that way. We sat for hours and talked and connected, and 8.5 hours later, I'm back at work. Everybody's back at work. The only difference was the seat to his district was open, and they held his district open for like 2 weeks. But we went back out and we're handling calls. And that was the start of a nosedive that continued for 16 years until 2017 happened. And it was the 16th anniversary of his death. I was in a bad marriage. And when I say bad marriage, she wasn't a bad person. She is a traumatized person as well. We came together. I was young and we tried to do the best we could. She's an amazing mother. We had drifted apart so much. We were fighting all the time. I yelled at my son and he turned around and he had an alligator tear. And he's like, I'm sorry for being bad. That crushed me, man. I went and got my work gun and I knew what I was doing. Went and got I was a detective sergeant at the time. And I went and got in the car and went to a place off Nolan Road and I had the intention of taking my life. I got to the point, I put the gun in my mouth and why, I don't know, but a guy texted me and my ex-wife had been blowing me up. But I look at the text message and I'm not pushing religion on anybody. I believe in God and I'm not going to ever not talk about that. I'm wrestling with him. So I don't know what that looks like, but it was God's intervention. And I immediately went home. I said, I need to get help. And less than a week later, it was a couple days later, I was still shooting for the Mavericks and I got off work. I went to shoot a game. I'd been there for a while at that point and they never put anybody with me. That night, they're like, hey, there's a program Warriors Ascent that's here. It's a nonprofit for veterans and first respond, or veterans is what they said at first. We're going to put their media guy with you. I was pissed. I don't fucking want their media guy with me. I want to do my own thing. I want to do what I want to do. And it was, again, a God moment because that man has saved my life twice. And I say that you're not suicidal until you are. And I've been suicidal a couple times in my life. By the grace of God, I'm not right now. But when I look back on my career and I look at the fact that in 24 years, 2 officers being killed, at least 6 being shot, not counting the horrific scenes. I had a critical incident debrief one time and the officer lived. And we have to do better. And so, yeah, the thing that gets me the worst is when you talk to people and they say, you knew what you were getting into. You don't. I know that every day I could walk out and get killed because I'm standing up for the law. We'll talk about that later and the meaning of that. But I realize that. What you don't realize is the impact it's going to have when you see some of the horrific things. And there's nothing in place. So fast forward, 2017, I meet Justin. He was working for Warriors Ascent at the time. And he talked me into going to the program. And it was because of a guy named Nathan Majors. He's KCPD. I don't even give a shit if he's mad. I watched his video. He's a Marine. And this big, badass, rugged dude was talking about feelings. And I'm like, if he can do it, I can do it. He's a cop. Because at that point, my dad was former military. He was a very violent man. So I didn't have any associations with military guys for the most part. Some of the PD guys. Yeah, it was the best decision ever, man. I went and I met some incredible veterans, some other incredible first responders, and they gave me the tools where basically I tell people that when I went, I was given that handshake introduction to here's what feelings are. I had no clue the ride I was going to go on from 2017 until now, but I'm thankful.
Yeah. Well, it was, you came on in that generation, and I kind of caught the most of that too, where we didn't talk about our feelings. It was about the job, and you just go do it.
Yeah.
And if you have feelings, you put them under your box and you can have them back, or under your bed in a box, and you can have them back when you get home, because we're here to do the job.
Correct. And at what cost?
Yeah.
I was our union president for 4 years. And I'm going to say this about my career. Because of the childhood I had, and because of Terry being killed very soon after me becoming a cop, I didn't connect with anybody that I worked with, really. I had a few people, like I had a partner. He's at a federal agency now. Amazing guy, young. I learned a lot from him. But when he left, it was like the final straw for me. Like, see, everybody leaves. And so I just didn't connect with anybody. And I was damn good at my job. I'm not saying that arrogantly. Unfortunately, I was involved. If there was a major crime in Independence, I was probably involved in it in the last 24 years, give or take. I had a wonderful career, but because of the way my retirement happened, the first year and a half, I was ashamed of my service. I was ashamed of retiring medically with PTSD. I was ashamed to have a dog to be able to have to go out in public. And then I did ketamine infusions, and it allowed me the headspace to start addressing my problems. And I can tell you, sitting here right now, I have no shame. There's a lot of things that hurts. My daughter's getting married in October, and I don't blame her for being mad, for not talking to me. My son's he's 22. What do you say? I'm not upset at the situation because I can understand it. I feel horrible that my kids have to deal with residual shit from me being a cop. My ex-wife, she has to. It's not fair being a spouse. And suddenly I got quiet, withdrawn, or angry. I coached my daughter softball, man, until she was high school. I was at all of my son's ice hockey events. He traveled. I tried to travel as much as I could, but I took him on several. But it was up to me to earn the money. And so I was all in with my job. They didn't get the best dad. They saw dad come home after something horrific happened and not know how to deal with it. And you deal with it the best way you can.
Yeah. Well, I mean, dude, like we talked about, it's that generation, and the generation that we were raised by, of men do these things, they provide, they go make the money. And then, yeah, if they do the other stuff, the baseball games and the travel and all that stuff, that's great. But my job is to make sure that you are clothed, fed, and have a roof over your head.
Exactly.
Like the emotional stuff, yeah, your mama's going to handle that, you know? And my dad was like that until later in his life, a little bit, because that's how he was raised.
Yeah.
You know, and it's a trickle down because you're modeling the only thing that you know.
Yeah. You're right. And I think that's where I used to very much blame myself. And that's where I had heard a similar quote to I'm not a good man, but I have a good heart. And if it's somebody else's, I'm sorry. I tried to, Charlie, come here. You got to sit down, buddy. The point I'm making is that when PTSD is left undiagnosed, untreated, which is the majority of our first responders, you're asking for these meltdowns. You're asking for problems. For me, the timing of 2017, that's March 17th. And in May, like I go to Warriors Ascent in April, and he's fine.
Okay. He's fine.
So
I got 2 upstairs, man. If he's not right in my face, he ain't touching that pit bull I got.
But this is March 17th. April, I go to Warriors Ascent. May, I come back, and I'm a sergeant up in investigations. We get called out to Hawthorne Apartments, which is a huge low-income housing complex. We've had a lot of crime there. Long story short, it was a pretty gruesome homicide. Patrol got on. And me and one of the captains from investigations got there. We walked through the scene to determine what we're going to need. Hands down, the most bloody scene I had been to at that date. We get upstairs, and I see the victim, and I know the victim. She worked with my ex-wife. She was the lunch lady. And to see, I don't want to be too graphic. It was a very graphic scene. It rocked me. So I go outside, and we're trying to coordinate because we had a suspect in custody and everything else. And the chief shows up and he goes, "Hey, meet me in my office at like whatever time." I don't remember what time. Go up to his office and he's like, "Hey, you have an internal affairs investigation. Somebody made a complaint alleging that you said all these inappropriate things." Okay. So over the course of that investigation, I'll summarize it from my truth point. They interviewed like 40 people up in investigations. It was ridiculous. All for basically shop talk. And the reason I was told that they were even having to do the investigation is because a complaint was made. And they're like, we realize that culturally, this is what you do, but we have to do something. So I went in and I was honest. I'm like, yeah, I said this, this, and this. I didn't say all these things. And I start looking at it. Long story short, 2 people had lied flat out, civilians on the department. I had the choice. I could have won. If I'd aggrieved it, I could have won it. I got 30-hour suspension. I get moved back to patrol. I got found guilty of anti-Semitic comments because another detective sergeant up there would walk around with pennies taped to his finger and his thumb, and he'd click them together because he was like the tightest guy with money. And so it had nothing to do with him being Jewish. He wasn't Jewish.
He was just leaning into the joke.
Yeah, we called him Jeff the Jew, and it was funny. Well, because I said that, and I admitted it because I said it,
yeah.
I got found guilty of making an anti-Semitic comment. And so I could have won that's not the point. The point is, it was a catalyst for change for me. And I started getting vocal about mental health care. I come back from Warriors Ascent, and they have an officer teaching building resilience, surviving secondary trauma. It was supposed to be a 4-hour class. Not his fault at all. The department had cut it down to 2. Well, when Kansas City, who created this, KCPD created it, it was 4 hours. You don't change the content.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I go and I sit down, and within 2 tables of me, I'm going to put this on so it doesn't keep roaming. Within 2 tables of me, there's 2 other officers who have been involved in shootings, taken lives. We walk in and we're handed I don't remember what it was called. It's basically that survey if you have PTSD. You're given no instructions and you're handed this and told to fill it out. And somebody is teaching the class from comprehensive mental health. Nobody answered, honestly.
Of course not.
And I was pissed because like one of the first videos they go into is cop suicide. No preamble going into it. And so I sit through this class and it was more harm than it was. And I'll give the department kudos. I went to him. I'm like, this is BS. Like, we have to do better. Okay. Go to the class and you can train it. So I did. Well, I had an ethical choice right then. Am I going to be honest or am I going to be pretty? I was honest. I told him about almost taking my life. I told him people things. Our commanders all sat through that. Everybody. It went over fairly well. There was a lot of naysayers who haven't dealt with their own stuff. I'm fine with that. I go teach to the fire department and a lot of success. So over the next couple of years, I completely changed who I am because I knew I needed to, not for the department because they will suck your soul dry, but for me. And I start having success with officers reaching out who are struggling. And right now I'm at 6 officers who, since I've shared my story, have said, I've saved their life. I got to keep doing that, man. And so my intent for doing Healing Trail Overland is, number one, to heal me as much as I can. I've never been able to connect with people. I've wanted to my whole life. I can now. I've wanted to hear opposing opinions. Now, when I was a cop, if you were anti-police, man, screw you. I don't want to hear it. There's a lot of changing needs to be done in policing. And I want to have those conversations. And I don't know if he'll watch this, but Zach Walker is the city manager for Independence. I would love for him to sit down and have an open dialogue with me about what we can do better. And I'll tell you why. Back to January of 22. We'd been through Blaze's death and they had scheduled debriefings. The next week, I was actually out of town. I couldn't break it. I had obligations. I was scheduled to go to the debriefing. So I emailed the major in charge and I said, hey, I'm out of town. I really need to go. I'm all in on this. Let me know. Get back. I don't hear anything. And so I sent 2 additional emails, which, by the way, I've got all my emails saved from when I worked there. So it's not a matter of arguing. And I send 2 more emails and I'm like, hey, I really need to go to this. And meantime, it never happened. So I was really pissed off. I was hurt, but I was still all in. So from 2017 until I medically retired, I'd been in therapy. I'd given it my all. I tried to do the job. I couldn't anymore. So January rolls around and I think it was like January 27th or 28th. I'd worked Monday through Thursday. I get off Thursday. Friday, I go to my shrink. He was doing my med management. And just in talking to him, he tells me, I can't have you go back to work. You need to file FMLA. This is going to be a work comp thing. Like, you're dissociating too badly. And I argued with him. I'm like, I'm good. I'm good.
Because that's what we do.
Yeah.
It's like, no, I still got one wheel.
And I'm like, I'm good. And he's like, I'm going to call the department. Like, you need to be off. I'm in shock. I don't expect this to happen. I call my captain and I tell him, and he's like, oh, okay. No response really. So I call somebody I knew in human resources And she got me all the paperwork to get filled out and everything else. And I immediately started a program. Well, let me back up. So he orders me off work, and he's like, I've got a great group therapy that meets every Monday night. It's like Monday and Thursday. He's like, you're going to be completely good. So I go to this group therapy. I am the only first responder in there. There's a lady across from me that's tweaking on meth. The lady in the corner is sitting there, and she's got this big stuffed animal, and she's rocking. And I'm like, whatever, She happens to be the first one to share. And she was triggered because DoorDash was late. There's like 4 people that get to me, and he's like, hey, introduce yourself, what you do, why you're here. And I'm like, I'm John. I'm not sharing anything else. No, this is a safe place. And I go, the fuck it is. Pass. So I sat there because it's a 3-hour deal. And I listened to all this. I was so pissed off when I got out. I called my wife and I'm like, if this is mental health, I can't do it. I happened to talk to a friend who is in Valiant Therapeutic Services, their inpatient program. And I met David and Cam. 2 people I will never forget. They do not let you get away with any of your BS.
For those of you who can't see that James is behind the camera because he didn't click it over to himself, he was giving the old Arsenio Hall. Whoop, whoop, whoop.
Yeah, so I go to Valiant, and I thought I was going for one thing.
Welcome to the fucking club, buddy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You think you're going for one thing, it always works out that way, and then you realize you're there for something else. And
how's that childhood narrative?
Yeah, that's what I got thrown into. So I was in Valiant from literally like the beginning of February until after my birthday in May. And in that meantime, I'd applied for medical retirement with loggers because I couldn't go on. And, their process is scary, man, because if you're not familiar with loggers, you essentially have to get all of your medical records, all your psych records. So everything I've said with my shrink, they have access to, which comes into play later. I get all these records. You have to write a narrative because the way the law was in Missouri at that time was if you were a firefighter and came down with PTSD, it was assumed that it was job related. But for police, they had to meet this element that it was above and beyond extraordinary to what any other officer deals with. Well, that was easy for me. Unfortunately, it was really easy. I had some horrific cases. And the shit that really sticks with you, cake. I listed, I don't know, just the really, really, really top 2% bad stuff. And what happens is your shrink has to fill out paperwork and make a determination. It then goes to the shrink at loggers. They then hire a third party off that list and they look at it. If 2 of the 3 agree, you're medically retired. And they were like, it's a hard process. It's a long process. I got done in 30 days. I can't complain. I sent my stuff in. The doctors all voted it. I got medically retired. I'm sitting in Valiant and, we're about to break at noon and I get a phone call and it's loggers. So I step out and they're like, hey, you're approved. You need to retire immediately. Tomorrow is the end of the pay period. You need to have all your stuff turned in, talk to your HR. I had 25 hours notice. So I called my captain immediately and I'm like, hey, they've medically retired me. I don't know what this means. Nobody has explained what this means. And I just know that they took me as if I worked until the age of 65. And that was credited for years of service. So the next morning, I have an appointment with my captain. I meet him up there at the PD, and I'm OCD about paperwork and everything else. And I had everything listed out, what I had, everything's in order. He starts going through it line by a line item. No problem. I'm like, hey, I'm going to go over to my office, which is literally next door to supply. I was a crime scene sergeant at the time. I'm going to go in the office, start cleaning my stuff out because I hadn't been back since my last day that I didn't know about. So I go in there and almost immediately he walks in and he's just hanging out, like standing there talking to me. He had never done that the whole time I worked for him. And so I finally turned, I'm that guy that
Just making sure you didn't steal that stapler.
Right. And so I've always been that guy that prior to 2017, I would say what needed to be said, but I was so not PC about it. Since 2017, I was just more PC about it. And I'm like, why are you standing here? And he's like, oh, I'm just hanging out. I'm like, you've never hung out the whole time I worked for you. Like, are you afraid I'm going to steal something? No. Well, he continues to hang out. So I box all my stuff up, put it on a cart. And as we're walking down, he's like, hey, I need your access card. And I'm like, no, you don't. The chief long ago said we still have access for range and stuff like that. And so we happened to walk out into the back lot. And at that time, we had an acting chief who is now the chief of police. And we were going through a lot of changes. It was very much, there was a lot of turmoil at the PD. And I go, hey, chief, am I supposed to turn in my card? And he's like, no, who told you that? And I just looked at him and I'm like, nobody, we're good. So I load my stuff up. I leave. And I'm thinking about it. And I'm like, man, they always put out a last call for the officer, Facebook post, nothing. I asked our PIO, who's a good guy. He's not in there anymore. I'm like, can we put something out? Like, this is almost like you're ashamed of me. I get walked out and it's just like as quickly as you can get away. I never got a last call. The honest to God, the thing that hurts me the most is 24 years of giving my heart and soul to that city. I couldn't get a last call. Fine. I'm past that. It hurts still though. And
Well, it's just another example of the stigma, man. You know, because if you would have gotten shot in the line of duty and had to be medically retired because of a physical disability,
they'll make sure you have all that.
oh yeah,
And
you'll get plastered all over the news, and it'll be this hero cop, and or you know, if it's a firefighter gets hurt in a, that's what it is. But
not with independence.
for mental health,
Yeah, mental health is a completely different beast.
Yeah.
But not with independence. And I'm not saying this. I'm not saying this to bash them. We have to get better. But what I was getting ready to say earlier, the whole reason I've invested over $100,000 into Healing Trails Overland, the reason I'm going to put myself out there, and I'm going to be honest, the good, the bad, the ugly, is because things need to change. So my whole goal in this Healing Trails Overland, my wife's whole goal is to gain enough influence socially that we can force change, specifically with first responders, but specifically at independents. And so Zach Walker's the city manager. If you watch this, which you're going to watch it at some point, call me. You've got my email. I want to sit down and talk. Things have to get better because to have a 24-year career and then leave that way, I felt so much shame. I felt regret. It wasn't until literally this week that I could tell my wife, I miss being a cop. I miss it with everything I have, the good parts.
No.
I don't miss the bureaucracy. As a sergeant, I could call out the SWAT team. There was times I was the highest ranking officer on for the city. But yet, if I have to order supplies, I have to have a major's approval, 2 levels above me. The cops that I worked with and firefighters with independence, predominantly because that was my career, some of the most giving, honorable people that I've ever met in my life. We all have our bad apples, right? Every profession has them because of the cool factor. It's cool to highlight the cops doing shit wrong.
Mm-hmm.
But what people don't realize is that we are expected to be robots to perform flawlessly, to make perfect decisions, all while under stress, sometimes having a nanosecond to respond, and then make sure you're within policy. Make sure all these things are in line. And it's an incredible amount of stress. Combine that with the fact that I'll say it, most of the commanders at Independence micromanage the shit out of us because that's what happened to them. And I've said for a long time, past practice doesn't make best practice.
Yeah, we were actually just talking about leadership on our last episode, and people that do it right, people that don't. And
I was one of those. I did it wrong. As a sergeant from 12 to 17, I had a good heart. I had a good direction, but I had no personal skills to truly be a supervisor. 2017, when I had my wake-up call and I decided not to fight it and I decided to work on me, I became a good supervisor. And I cared and loved my people before, but I could show it then. And so the intent of this is to gain enough influence, because my experience with the city of Independence, unless you force their hand on something, they're not going to make a change. And it's sad, because I hope he watches this. And one question I want to ask him: what is the police department, what is the city doing for the mental health of first responders in Independence? He's not going to know the answer. That's sad. I'm not upset at him. He's in a system that this has been okay. I've said for a long time, and first responders are 20 years behind the military. I now have a bunch of military veteran friends, and they'll admit it. They're like, yeah, our healthcare sucks, but you guys are so far behind us. You know, first responders, we don't have a VA. And I'm not saying theirs is good, and I'm not comparing service. I'm not saying any of that, but it's very similar in service from what I've found. The last 2 years, I had a work comp suit going against the city. And I'm not going to say how much I got, because it's going to cover my future medical for my mental health and things like that. But I sat down in this process with their defense attorney, who, by the way, is a very nice man, but he was doing his job. Because he had access to all my mental health records, one of the first questions he asked when we got to the meat of it was, well, you had a lot of trauma as a child. Don't you think this PTSD is from that? And I was kind of blown away, because it's like, you're really shifting blame. Like, I see this, like, all my years of being a supervisor, I had seen, like, you arrest somebody and it may not have happened, or he fought us and he gets roughed up. They settle out of court. Their phone gets broke, they settle out of court. But with their employees, oh no, they'll fight you. So my simple response was, I don't know, what did the psychological say I took when I got hired? Because I was sane. And so we have a matrix for where I was at. We have a matrix of where I'm at now. We know I didn't get arrested. I didn't become an alcoholic. I didn't have these. It was all trauma. But in the effort to limit liability, they have to ask you stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And he was a nice man. He was doing his job. But I had to rehash every traumatic thing that got me to retirement, just so they could have it for the record.
Yeah. Well, and unfortunately, the reality of it is, they're not the only department like that. I would hazard a guess that the vast majority of departments are exactly the same. Yeah. And I think it's starting to change. There are departments who are moving forward and, kind of getting with the times, as you say. But a lot of them are still stuck in that old thinking of, well, it's just easier to replace them. Let's shuffle them off. And if we don't have to pay them, fantastic.
Honestly, I told my attorney on two separate occasions the way this got drug out. We've settled now. But I told him on two separate occasions that it almost seemed as if the city was trying to see how long I could last.
Oh, 100%.
And I was getting mad at the city because being a cop in Independence, you were expected to do what you're told, not to have free thinking, and be the robot, be the good robot. Meanwhile, the guys and girls that are out there on the front lines are making life and death decisions every day, and very critical decisions, and doing it successfully. But when they get in the car chase or they get in a foot chase and something happens because it's the cost of doing business, I'm not talking malicious stuff. That's stuff that happens, they get disciplined for. My wife is at a Metro Fire Department, and it's amazing that they can wreck and do $200,000 damage to a fire truck. And essentially, there's a letter that goes in their file for a year. We had a matrix where if I wreck a car, and for the longest time, it was like $500. Anything over $500 was a letter of reprimand. The second offense was days off. And after guys got suspended for doing their job, they finally started upping those limits. Well, they're still not upped. So
Well, that's because, and we've had this conversation too, the people that are making those decisions have no clue of what actually goes on at the street level. Either they have never done it, or it's been so long since they have done it that it's not the way that it used to be.
Right.
And, you know, I know personally fire departments all across the country, guys that struggle with that, of they have these admin, you know, these directors and, you know, chiefs of their departments that are passing down, you know, it's the good idea fairy of, hey, this looks good on paper. But whenever you take it down to the street level and, you know, you're trying to do this day in and day out, it doesn't work.
It doesn't. And I came to the choice when I finally came to terms with, okay, first responders were all about control. This is out of my control. I can't be a cop anymore. I wish I could. Okay, what do I do now? I have two choices. I either sit around and I get bitter, like so many of our guys have, guys and girls, or I do something about it and I come up with this crazy idea that maybe will affect some change. Don't know, but we're not going in debt to do this. So it's a win-win for me, because if we flop and nobody watches it and cool, I still am going to have some amazing healing experiences.
Well, dude, just give it time.
Yeah.
That's what it is, because it will be a grind. It takes a lot of promotion and just consistency with content. I mean, look, this will be like episode 149 or 48 or something like that.
I think we hit probably 100 episodes before we got to the point where people were reaching out to us just to ask for help.
Yeah.
And that's the thing, is I'm going into it like I wasn't the superstar cop. I was an investigations cop most of my career. That was my path. I was damn good at it. I put a lot of bad people away for a long time. I don't want to say bad people. I've changed that now. I've put people away who have committed crimes for a long time, and I don't feel bad about that. But we have to start doing better. So for me to do that, this is the platform I chose, because when I get retired and I go through these surgeries, I get out of the surgery and I realize my brain's still screwed up. My wife and I get on Google and we search first responder treatment centers. Immediately, there was one that came up in Florida. When I started reviewing it, their reviews were bad. And they're like, no, there's heroin addicts sitting in there with us. It wasn't all cops or first responders. So I came to a place out in Utah. It was the only place we could find. And they guaranteed 65% law or first responders. And the other people are vetted very highly. You'll be comfortable. I get out there. We got certified, Charlie and I, 3 days before I went to Utah. And I was supposed to, like, we had trained I was at over 650 hours with him at this point. And the evaluators said, let's try it. Take the test. If you pass, you take him with you. If you don't, he stays. We figure it out. 2.5 hour test. He passes. I was so proud. 3 days later, we're on a plane to Utah, and we get off in Utah. My wife drops us off in a rental car, and we are thrown to the wolves. Within probably 2 weeks, the house had changed so much that there was me and one other police officer and one firefighter out of a house of 22 people. Everybody else was drug addicts or alcoholics, which I am not saying that disparagingly at all, I felt like I got lied to. We were getting our room searched. They were playing games with, well, you're on the 3rd floor. Now you're on the 2nd floor. Now you need to go back up to 3. It was a horrible experience. But what I garnered from there was they put me in a room with an old man, and I'm not going to say his name. This guy, I don't want to give up too much of his history, but he's a convicted felon. This was his 11th rehab. He was, honest to God, the most real person I've ever talked to, because for him, this was his treatment. And he shared things with me that he's never shared with any other soul on this earth, and I'll never repeat those. But I formed a connection with that man, and we still text to this day. But it opened my eyes to, holy crap, everything I've believed my whole life is not true. Implement I get back from this facility, and I started ketamine. I get through ketamine, and I got to the place where I literally had to challenge every belief I had. And I've done that. And I've said sorry to the people I need to say sorry to. It's on them if they accept it, when they accept it, if they do. And it's about me going on a journey now to heal and to try to have the best life I can while still serving, because I get to tell those gap stories. And by the way, I'm going to have to learn how to edit video. Overland, camp, start fires, like literally everything. But it's cool because I don't know what I don't know. And my entire career being a cop, you had to know. Even if it was bullshit, you had to have an answer. You had to have a direction. I'm not doing that now. I want to hear if somebody says, F the police, why? I don't want to argue. Help me understand why you feel that way. Because for me, I started noticing that we needed to change in law enforcement when I got back from Warriors Ascent. And I'll never forget this. I'm at 35th and Noland. I'm a bald white cop. I can't tell you the number of times I was told I was racist or a skinhead just because of that. But I was riding 2-person with another guy who was about to be promoted to sergeant. He's driving. I'm in the passenger seat, and a black family's walking westbound from 35th and Noland. And I have baseball cards from the Royals. I'm like, this is cool. I normally wouldn't hand them out or interact with people, but I was on that healing journey, man. And I'm like, hey, buddy, come here. I got baseball cards for you. Terrified look on his face and his dad's. And I realized, like, I was that cop that for 24 years, no, there's not racism. There's not a effed up system. I was so blind. And so I've been on a journey to start learning and have different experiences. And eventually I'm going to circle back after we've gained the influence, and I'm going to have that conversation with independents. But when I got on Google and I realized there's nowhere to help me, I realized, and you can mark my word, when we did my business plan, or not mine, when my wife created the business plan, I had some input, but on objectives. That's it, because she's way better with business than me. But on these objectives is within the first year, I'm going to start a list on my website healingtrailsoverland.com, which has a landing page right now. But I'm going to start a page of resources, stuff that I've been to, because right now the problem we have with first responders is that there are thousands upon thousands of veteran organizations that serve veterans, are funded for veterans. They don't serve law enforcement. They don't serve fire. They don't serve others that are under that umbrella. Trying to find those resources when you're fucking suicidal is not the time.
No, you're 100% right on that.
And we all know we're not going to call the 1-800 number because police are going to show up at your door. And while I now live in Independence, up until I got back from Utah, I'd lived in Blue Springs. And that was a hard thing, man, because as a cop, you have to know the reality. Like if I die, every cop that responds is going to see my junk. Am I okay with this? If I die, are they going to take some effed up selfie with me? Like you got to think of these things. And so I live back in the city now and I'm invested in the city. I want to see this city do good things for the people. But unfortunately, Independence is such full of good old boy politics. It's going to take a wake up call. And you have people there that are trying to do the right thing, but their hands are tied.
Yeah. Oh, dude. I mean, like I said, I've said it a couple times. It's not just there. It's nationwide.
Yeah.
And the fact that there is such a lack of inpatient treatment centers for first responders that are specific for first responders. And look, if you're watching this and you're not a first responder and you might be sitting there thinking, well, what does it matter? Well, it does. And I'm not saying like we're like some special and we deserve special treatment or whatever, but the things that we have to deal with and the types of trauma and our special brand of stupid, we need clinicians who know what that is. We use the term culturally competent.
Not a random EAP person.
Well, yeah. And so, but even like, so look, culturally competent clinician, right? That can mean a bunch of different things. It's not just, we're not just talking about, oh, we want a clinician who is culturally competent with the fire service. Just like you have culturally competent clinicians who deal with Muslim population or
absolutely
Hispanics or whatever, because that's what they specialize in. So they know that culture.
Yeah. Our
culture as first responders is different than the norm. And fire is a little bit different than police, which is a little bit different than veterans, which is, and there's a lot of crossover there.
Yeah.
But there's also a lot of differences.
There is.
And you have to have a program and a place to go that understands that.
I agree.
Because if you're the narco cop and you're getting put in with a bunch of junkies,
yeah,
how's that going to go?
That's the thing that it broke my heart once I realized that there's no clearinghouse you have all these organizations. I don't want to be a clearinghouse. I'm doing this out of necessity because after I retired, I've seen 2 other IPD officers retire and their story's the same. The garbage they've had to go through, and it's not for me to share all theirs, but it's gut wrenching. And at a certain point, I don't blame my commanders, my city leadership. But at a certain point, you're seeing guy after guy retire and these same issues. When I retired, so I had 25 hours. My wife goes with me. My head's spinning. I turn all my gear in. I go over to human resources. We fill out all the paperwork and you had to make all these decisions that, thank goodness I made them right. And I said, okay, when is my exit interview? Oh, we don't do those in person. We send you a survey. And I go, my response, I go, 24 years and I'm getting medically retired because of the job and nobody's going to talk to me. No, we send a survey and the whole reason behind this, it's so much better. It goes down to Mark downtown, Mid-American Regional Council. They collect all the data and they tell us what we need to know. And I go, this is so absolutely screwed up. So I'll give kudos to Adam Dustman. He's the new police chief there. He's like interim. And I'm like, let's meet for lunch. He and I were friendly when he was a patrol captain. We had banter back and forth. He's a good guy. He met with me and I outlined everything. Well, the problem is, and this is where independence gets so dirty, is there was a person who was leading peer support for independence that never should have been in that position. If people that know the situation will know because it was on the news and everything else. But the point I make is independence stood up peer support and put a civilian in charge of it and then handpicked all their people. And I have documentation of those original peer support people going back to command staff to tell them everything that they'd talked about with the person. Okay. I realize I'm throwing a big stone right there, but it's true. People don't utilize peer support because the peer support there, and I'm not saying the people, there's people on it that care and are trying, but the premise of it being set up was against policy, ethically wrong. And that's what the men and women at Independence Police have for peer support now. Okay. You take all these little isolated incidents and you're like, no big deal. No big deal. Well, suddenly it becomes a big deal because like my last 2 years of the police department, I was crime scene sergeant. So I put in for the spot. I get it. I'm all excited. And I go up there and the unit is trashed. That unit had been neglected for so many years. And you had 4 or 5 at the time, civilian crime scene investigators who tried to do the best job they could do, given what they had. Nobody to supervise them, nobody to give them support. So when there's lack of leadership, things go offline. And getting back online, there were some growing pains. But for the first year and a half that I was sergeant up there, I was on call 24/7, 365. People think that's not a big deal, but in police world, when I was given the expectations that I'm going to be out on every major crime scene, meaning any shootings, stabbings, homicides, things that could be homicides, I was out a lot. I'm getting called out multiple times a week, some weeks. I'm getting calls in the middle of the night. Hey, we had an officer shot in the head. He got taken to center point. Okay, well, what do we need? We don't know anything. And then you show up and you have to deal with it. It wore on me. And finally, a supervisor that was up in investigation said, hey, I'll take 1 week a month. That's when I'm on call. I'll at least cover for you. So I had 1 week reprieve a month. And I started sending emails. I started having meetings, kind of like I did with getting help. Fell on deaf ears. You know what you signed up for, go back to patrol. Well, your option with patrol is, I'll just get into, for me and my mental health at that time, it wasn't an option. And so I stayed. I kept going on call outs, kept going on major scenes, kept giving until I couldn't give anymore.
Yeah. And like we talked about on the phone the other night, that seems like a terrible, terrible idea for a schedule.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not sustainable. It's not sustainable for, a month, 2 months, 3 months. Definitely not for a year.
And I'm not mad at my command staff because they were raised in the suck it up buttercup era. That's what they know. But at a certain point, we have to change. We have to say enough is enough. And I'm blessed because I'm not bound. I can say whatever I want to say. And the guys and girls that are there can't. I'm not going to do it maliciously because I love that department. As screwed up as it is sometimes, I love that department and the people there, but it's got to change. And so I'm going to go on this healing journey of my own, and I'm going to do everything in my power to get enough influence. So maybe if we start identifying these problems and making them public, people smarter than me can come together and figure out how to come up with the solutions.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's the key. I think it's, obviously there's a problem. I mean, you can just look at the numbers so far this year of how many cops and firefighters have killed themselves already this year.
Yeah.
And it's like, come on. Like in some of these places, it's with, it's multiples in one organization.
Yeah.
What are we doing? Like how many before as an industry we go, okay, enough's enough. Whatever we've been doing in the past doesn't work. Like we need to figure out, let's go find an organization. Let's go find a police department. Let's go find a fire department that's doing it right and having success. Let's go do that.
Right.
At least give it a try. And don't give me the bullshit about, oh, well, who's going to pay for it or who's going to this? Well, guess what? You owe it to your people to do it. Figure out a way to pay for it.
Oh, I agree.
There's government grants. There's all kinds of money. Like it's sitting out there.
I
So
agree.
just fucking go do it.
Here's the problem is that, sorry, my phone's been going nuts. Here's the problem.
Everybody knows you're on this podcast, man.
No, my buddy does. So I want to circle back to that if we can real quick.
Sure.
Because you asked about kind of in a roundabout way how I got to overlanding.
Yeah.
So May of last year, I'd been crapped on by this other organization, Puppies Behind Bars. I'll say their name. It was horrible. I'd gotten approved for a dog. And I was supposed to go out last August, fly out and get my dog. You train with a prisoner for a week, you train with their people for a week, and then you come home and you have a service dog. Well, right before I went out, I get an email and another dog handler, their dog had died. So they take priority. Man, that was respectful because it was like they take care of their own. No problem. When do you think it'll be? Well, it'll be January. So January rolls around. And right before I'm like, I haven't got travel plans or anything. And I'm like, what's going on? And I just get an email response. We're not going to have a dog for you. And we won't. Or we don't have a dog for you and we're not going to. No further explanation. Well, PTSD, you internalize that. That's me. I'm not good enough. I don't deserve this. I list the gamut. And I find Missouri Patriot Paws. So I'd already got Charlie from a breeder down in Arkansas. The lady still follows us on social media. She's an amazing lady. Her breeds have produced other service dogs, and I had no idea what I was getting into. None. I'd bought Charlie around the time that I got the bad news about not getting a dog, and I was just like, well, I'll figure it out. And I start training. Well, in order to start training, Missouri Patriot Paws sent two people over, Sandra and John. John's a Marine vet. He's my best friend now. And he shows up and he's driving a Toyota Tacoma, same color as my Ranger. And he's built out to Overland. And I'm like, what is this? This is amazing. And so we just started talking. And I had known him like a week before I got sent to Utah. So like my brain was jacked when we met and he still thought I was cool. So I'm like, this is a good dude. So I get back and I just kind of deep diving it. And I'm telling my wife, like, I really want to do this. And she was the one that encouraged me. She's like, build out top of the line, like money's not an object with your Ranger. And I did that. And man, I had no idea about anything. And so I finally landed and I'm working with Adventure Motors in Grandview. The guys there are awesome. March 6th, we start my build. I'm not going to give any more away about it because
no, dude, you got to save that for social.
It's going to be really cool. Just the truck itself, like a dream come true. Because my truck won't look the same. But I think what gives me the most hope and joy is being able to connect with people like I never have before, hear differing views, hear the uncomfortable things, and then put it in a product so people can start understanding what we're dealing with. Because I'm not coming on to tell this story, poor, pitiful me. Stuff happens. I was given the life I was dealt. I'm alive for a reason. I have, unfortunately in my life, had many times that I should have legitimately died. In 2020, I had 8 surgeries, and I don't think I've processed all those. I'm here for a reason, and every door has been opened for this. And it's going to be cool to see where it goes.
Well, I, for one, am definitely looking forward to it. And if you want to do some test trips down to Arkansas, hit me up.
So we are. First trip is going to be Glade Top, and then we're going to go to Disney.
I just did Glade Top in January, beginning of January.
I hear it's cool.
It's phenomenal.
So part of the insanity of this is I've tent camped twice. One was a float trip, and one was like a one night overnight. I loved it. But when I was in Utah, that first night that I was there, my head's spinning. I'm in this lockdown residential treatment center. They let me go outside because my dog, otherwise he's going to go to the bathroom. And for the first time in my life, I'm standing underneath stars that I felt like I could touch. And the awe and wonder. And I had some really difficult conversations with myself, with God, with my wife. And over the course of this dream has been born. So I say all this. On my channel, I'm going to talk about the good, the bad, the ugly. We're going to be truthful. If I don't know, I don't know. I'm not going to pretend I know stuff like I did my whole career. It's on a journey of exploration, but there's no topics off limit because my opinion, in America, we've gotten to this society where we can't talk about things. And a very life-changing book for me that I read was The Subtle Art of Not Giving an F. And I'd read parts of it before, but it hit different. And I started really thinking about, like, why do I care? Why do I care what other people think? Because we wrap ourselves up into this. And the entire time I was at the PD, I was so torn because I was a sergeant and I had to uphold policy. That pissed people off because you're such a tight family that when you stand up against things, you're the bad guy. And it shouldn't be like that. The way my career went down and we didn't have the help we need, it shouldn't have been like that. So kind of to circle back, I can complain about it or I can do something about it. This is me trying to do something about it.
Well, dude, I, for one, like I said, I'm excited for you and definitely excited to see what you put out.
Yeah.
So.
It's going to be, it's going to definitely be interesting, but I've done harder things. And, you know, when you go to put yourself out on social media like that, you have to ask yourself, is there anything that could come up that's going to haunt me?
Dude, let me tell you something about social media. Just remember, there's a lot of keyboard warriors out there, and it does not matter what you put out. You could say the sky is blue and it is sunshining, and somebody is going to argue with you.
You know, what I've found is true friends are the ones that stick around when things get bad. My friend John, he's that guy. He has been around for the worst of me, and he's getting ready to be around for the best. I am the most clear-headed I've ever been in my life. I, for once, have agency in my life where I can make my decisions and I choose my fate. I've never had that before. And I want to do this the right way, but it's also going to be ugly. Right before I went to Utah, I lost some friends over this. I went to a CrossFit gym, and I'm not going to name them. I went to a CrossFit gym with my dog. He was in training at the time, but service dog and in training are afforded in Missouri the same rights as a service dog. It ended up being blown up into your dog's not coming into my gym. So I blasted the guy. I stood up for another dog team that had been affected. I stood up for somebody else. And that somebody else I lost a friendship over. That's fine because I stood up for them. The thing I found going through that is your true friends emerge when you need them to. And your true friends are the ones that are down for, man, this is going to be ugly, but I believe in you. Leaving law enforcement the way I did, I truly believe that the brotherhood is bullshit. And I'm going to quantify why I say that. That thin blue line, the brotherhood that's talked about, is there until something happens. Because I've seen so many people start struggling with mental health as first responders, and nobody knows what to say to them. So they don't say anything. And then you feel isolated. And then that isolation builds into everything else you're dealing with, to the point that you start thinking about killing yourself because it would be better. When are we going to get to where we have these tough conversations like you do? I told you before we started this, the thing I appreciated about you guys both, is you let people come on and tell their truth. I didn't say the truth, their truth. And you ask good questions. That's what I'm going to do with mine. Because people need to see the impact that this job has on everybody around you. Everybody. It's affected my kids. I'm sure it's affected my kids' friends, because I had an incident one day where we go and it sounds like it's going to be a home invasion. And the call ends that it's a bunch of high school kids that went with my kids. They're dressed head to toe, wearing black, carrying airsoft guns with no tips on it. And when we showed up, they take off. We foot chase them. Guy comes around a corner. I almost blast this kid. When he sits down and everything's under control, he looks at me and he goes, "Is your son's name Mason?" Dude, that is so hard. I've had to do death notifications for my kids' classmates. And it's not the death notification, it's knowing them. From the time Terry got killed in 2001, I went to his funeral. I didn't go to another one. And I see that the buildup from 2001 to 2017, every red flag was there. Like every one. I was a damn good cop. I was overweight, grossly obese. My mental health was garbage. I was piping off at the mouth. I was getting in trouble, but never getting in trouble. Every red flag was there. Everybody missed it. I'm not upset about that. Let's do better. That's why, if the Independence Police Chief wants to sit down and have an actual conversation, I'll do it. But the thing I'm worried about is, as soon as we get politicians involved, we get masses of people involved, everything becomes an agenda. It's not about how can we fix this. Right now we have a job where, I said at the beginning, your military and your first responders are killing themselves and family sometimes, because of things they see and things they do. Do we need to talk about better mental health screenings? We can, but you already have next to nobody wanting to do these jobs. So how are you going to limit that? The point I'm making is, you're not going to remedy it. So we got to fix it. How do we do that?
Yeah. Well, and it starts with, obviously mental health screenings coming into the job. Or, I don't think really that fixes anything.
It doesn't.
What I think needs to happen is mental health training as you go along.
100%.
You have to change the culture. You have to remove the stigma, and there has to be things in place to where, because ideally what you want is for people not to get to that point.
Yeah.
And if you are able to, if you use a cup as your brain, as an analogy, and you fill it up with trauma, if you're able to empty that out to where it doesn't get too full, you don't ever get to that point.
Yeah.
And some people are more naturally resilient than others. And, some people that have, like we talked about, it's different for everybody, but we got to start somewhere, some kind of training.
Do something.
Do something. And it has to be ongoing.
Correct.
Like, start with wellness checks. That's your baseline of, okay, how are we doing right now? What are the areas we need to work on? Can we think about changing schedule? Can we think about sabbaticals? Can we think about, whatever? Or is it as simple as, or not as simple as, but okay, what about mandatory retirements?
Yeah.
Like you're capped at this point, you're done.
I know KCPD has that, but it's a gross amount. I don't want to say it's 25 or 30 years.
Well, so I like to point at, I think it's Sweden. Once you hit the age of 30 as a firefighter, you are no longer allowed to go inside structure fires. So you can do stuff outside. You could be in command, you could pump the water, you could do whatever.
That makes sense.
But after 30, because of the strain on your body and the carcinogens and the chance of getting injured and then rehab time, they have a whole matrix of why 30 is their number. But after that, no, you're done.
How did their guys and girls feel about that?
So from what I know, it's just been that way for a really long time. So, and also you have to remember fire department culture overseas is not the same that it is here.
Yeah.
So I think from what I can tell, it's very different. I know that in some countries, like their military is responsible for the fire suppression. And like some places, it's like, okay, you're a firefighter for like 4 years and then you're done. Like you go on and have a different career and something. Like it's not a career, it's a job that you have for X amount of years and then you're done. Obviously the people that like run the fire service are career people.
Yeah.
But yeah, here, I mean, and even now, like departments are changing because, used to be a lot of places it was 25 years and you could retire.
Yeah.
Well, now they've upped it to it's 27 and a half before you can retire now.
Had I gone till I was 55, I would have had 32 years of service on just to not take a hit. And man, I'm 47 and I literally right now in the best shape of my life. I realize how hypocritical it says what I'm about to say sounds, but if I had 2 suggestions for the Independence city manager, it would be immediately implement some sort of wellness program. They have a voluntary one, but if you know that the obstacle course I ran to get hired, I had to do that every year. If I'm not doing that, that's a red flag. We had an early warning system. It was such BS. It didn't work.
No.
The entire time from, was it 11 or 12? Anyways, I got promoted in, I think it was 12. And I never did an early warning system on one of my officers because it was a form nobody ever used.
Mm-hmm.
And so implement that. Give them the time to work out on duty because the public has expectations for fitness, for mental fitness, and we're not doing anything to allow these people to do it.
Yeah.
From what I see with my wife being a firefighter, it's a little bit better because you guys can work out at the station. But for cops at Independence,
it's a choice for firefighters. Yeah. I mean, it's like, yeah, you can if you want to, but you don't have to. Like, we don't have to take the CPAT every year. We don't have, like, there's no, if you get to be 500 pounds, we'll order you bigger bunker gear.
So I got up to 394 pounds.
Yeah. It's fucking ridiculous. I saw a post the other day that really hit home. It's like, once you become a first responder, you have lost the right to be out of shape, both mentally and physically.
I agree.
You no longer have that right.
But the problem is, I agree, you have to have systems in place to allow that. And Independence, the only guys that can work out on duty when I left, I have heard it's changed, was the SWAT guys and detectives. Or if you were at a job that had this at the station. Because when I was a crime scene sergeant, on days that I could, I would go work out on duty. I took advantage of that. But patrol wasn't allowed to. And patrol was the only people who didn't wear outer vests. It's such a small morale thing. Every other unit in the department wore outer vests. Patrol had been asking for years. Nope. Now They have an outer vest that looks like a uniform shirt that is completely non-practical because they can't move all the stuff off their belt up onto their vest. And it defeats the point. And people say, well, you don't need that. Well, look at all the data from other departments. And I don't know, how about we do something to give back to morale? But 2 of the police chiefs I worked under told me numerous times, they don't care about morale. You hired on for this job. You didn't hire on for the benefits. Do your job. And so
that's completely opposite, because a lot of us came on for the benefits. That used to be one of the selling points for these careers, was the benefits.
So when I got hired, the advantage to independence is you took your health care with you. They've since changed that. Guys that come on now, guys and girls, they don't get that. And so I'm grandfathered in, luckily. But the reason I say that about physical fitness is I think it's going to be an early indicator to bigger issues. Because if your mind's not right, your body's not going to be right. And so start implementing, give them you're going to have some grace period. You're going to have to figure it out. But at some point you have to start, just like this mental health thing. Nobody wants to do anything, and everybody says it's screwed up. Why aren't we doing anything?
That's the age-old question, isn't it?
So the week I got ordered off, I'm sitting in my major's office, and there was another guy that has since retired who was off because of PTSD. This major, who I've known since before I was a cop, starts complaining about guys just need to toughen up. You know, they pull this shit with PTSD, and there's been men come before them. There's going to be men come after them. They need to suck it up. I got up and I walked out. 2 days later, I was ordered off. Guess who didn't check on me? My major. Guess who didn't check on me? Well, I'm sorry, my captain did once, and I don't fault him. I'm not trash talking him. He doesn't know better. Initially, I get ordered off from the shrink, and I'm getting phone calls and text messages about work crap. And I finally had to tell him, I'm like, guy, I'm ordered off for a reason. I got one text after that. Hope you're doing okay. That was it. And I had a couple of people reach out. And part of that's my fault, because I wasn't the most social butterfly. I was there to do a job. And then once you become a supervisor, you have no more friends unless it's other supervisors.
Yep.
And fine, that's the path I chose. That's fine. But the other part of that is moving back to independence. Like I said, if I lose my crap one day, Independence PD is coming to my house to deal with me as a 1031 subject. I have no doubts they'll do a good job. They do a phenomenal job for the most part. Why can't we do that same thing for the other cops when they're off and when they're struggling? I don't know the answer to that.
Culture. That's ultimately what it boils down to, is the culture has to change.
You're right.
And then if the officers and the firefighters start demanding it, then administration has no choice but to start.
They do have a choice, because we've gone through this whole defund the police and all this BS. And let's speak honestly about that. What you're asking for, let's provide them less training. Let's provide them less officers. What I've always heard that as is we need to rewrite how policing is done. I will 100% agree with that. It's, especially being in Jackson County, your frustration as a cop is that I get in a car chase with a bad guy in a stolen car. More than likely, Jackson County Prosecutor's Office, they're not going to file charges. So Independence, we had traffic tickets and GOSs, which are like a traffic ticket, for pretty much everything but rape and homicide. And so we would have officers who got in a car chase with a stolen car, fought the guy, and for whatever reason, Jackson County didn't want to prosecute. And so they're writing tickets And while they're still writing the report, that suspect is walking out the front door. And I have personally been on calls where I'm still writing the report and we're back out on the same person. Let's talk about the big elephant in the room, the parade shooting. This wasn't a first responder issue. This is a lack of prosecution issue in this county. Criminals in Jackson County do not fear committing crime because they know they're not going to get put in jail, that they're going to be, they're going to be on SIS or secret probation so many times it doesn't matter. How many times has it been in the Kansas City news of the prosecutors not doing their jobs, the judges not doing their jobs, but yet they still have their jobs? There are good prosecutors, there are good judges, but the system as a whole here in Jackson County is broken. The system as a whole in Independence PD is broken. The public doesn't have a clue that on the average night, if you were to, how many officers do you have on, like say tonight at 3 a.m.? If it's still the same way it was when I left 2 years ago, you're going to have about 12 officers on initially, and then it's going to be the early night for some. And between 3 and 6 a.m., there's times that we had 4 and 5 officers on for independence.
Yeah.
How do you justify this?
I think they justify it because nobody knows. So they don't have to justify it. Because if the people that actually paid their taxes knew about that,
oh, they'd be livid.
They'd be livid.
When I started in 98, we had a good handle on crime. I'm not going to get into the politics of how that happened because we had a pretty good handle on it. We were able to be proactive. We were able to keep crime out of Independence. We knew who our turds were, and we had community policing. I'll never forget Wayne Hartley, like an OG officer. He worked Fairmount up on 24 Highway. And I thought it was so stupid when I started because he'd get out and walk his district and talk to people. And he made every new guy. I never had him, but he made my friends do it when they got hired. And I see the genius in that now.
Yeah.
They don't have time for it. They don't have time to, I live in Independence. I've been in the city since the end of September. I saw my first Independence police car in my neighborhood less than a week ago. And they were on a panic alarm next door. It's the only reason. Like, they are getting beat down. They don't have, Kansas City's the same way. People are getting tired and burnt out. This is all I know what to do.
Yeah.
I'm not coming on here as an expert cop or anything else. What I'm coming on here is I'm going to give the reality of the lack of mental health resources for first responders. And it's going to piss people off. And I don't care. I really don't.
Well, hopefully it'll affect some change.
I hope.
So reach to the right people and,
that's what we're trying to do right now. And so, yeah, we're kind of, the plan is, I'm going to put it out there because once you put it out there, you have to do it. Right.
Yep.
So I get built out March 6th. It's going to be a few weeks. By this summer, I'm going to Baja, Mexico. I'm doing my first big trip. I'm going to do a lot of short little trips to kind of learn how to drive my new truck and how to not die.
Yeah.
But I'm going to bail, my dog and I think my buddy John may go if he can. If not, it's just going to be me and him. And we're going to go have some amazing experiences. We're going to meet people. We're going to tell stories along the way. I'm going to cry. Being a career fat guy, one of my biggest things is you have to pre-plan everything, but you're like, man, first time I'm somewhere and I got to take my shirt off and get in the water. I don't care. I am who I am. If you don't like it, okay.
Yeah, then don't watch.
Yeah. And that's the whole thing. And there'll be bad comments. Fine. Those are hurt people. I used to be all in on fighting, and all these people, like my major's ignorant statement, he's hurt himself. And he's just so deep into it, he doesn't know it. And once I had that realization of the only way for me to do this is to be fully transparent and say the good, the bad, the ugly. Like my wife had to ask, she's like, okay, you're going to film this stuff. Are you going to film when you're having a bad day? Yeah, I'm going to, because it is humiliating being a 24-year cop to have a dog, which by the way, he's like the cutest dog ever, but on the scale of athleticism, not at all. But it's embarrassing having to have a dog to be able to go to the grocery store. But it is what it is. I am where I'm at. I'm not going to complain about it. I don't want anybody to feel sorry for me. But let's listen together and figure out how to change.
Yeah. Well, I support it 100%, man. I think what you're doing is going to be pretty fantastic. And like I said, I am looking forward to it.
No, I appreciate that. There's so many memories coming to light now that I'm sitting here thinking of it. Back after I was undercover, I came back and I was Independence was trying to stand up an intelligence unit. And we went out to New York. Man, I had an amazing career. I got to go to a lot of places. Training sucked. Independence, no money. Do everything with less. So I come back and it kind of evolves into Special Victims Unit is what it is now. But we focused on internet crimes against children. And so I think it was almost 5 years I was doing that role. And I worked with two amazing guys. One of them's died. He died in an off-duty car accident here in Kansas City. He was an amazing leader. We started the kind of internet crimes against children here in Independence. We had Operation Guardian Angel that we did, which was the first time that people had been charged with human trafficking that were soliciting underage girls. It was a big sting, and I'm super proud. I got into policing and I said, if I could save one person, it's worth it. I have one story from my cyber crimes days that made it all worth it. There were times sitting at my desk that you're having to go through evidence and I would physically vomit in the trash, or I would start bawling because it was so horrific. Never any kind of counseling. In 2005, we had a male-female serial killer in Independence, and they raped, tortured, and abducted women and videotaped it. I had to go through hours upon hours upon hours of video and literally document if they punched, kicked, bit her, what songs were playing in the background, everything, so that we could establish this was the date and time that this happened. I served a subpoena to Mix 93.3. And I knew at the time they knew what the hell was going on because it was a huge case. It was all over national news. Very professional people. But after that, until probably 2018 to 2020 range, I couldn't listen to music because everything triggered what I'd seen on those videos. I couldn't be intimate with my wife because everything triggered those. I say that, yeah, it's embarrassing telling people I can't be intimate with my wife because of videos I watched, but that's the reality. It was such a bad case. We went to death penalty trial. The suspect was Richard Davis. This is all court record. I testified so many hours. Leading up to testifying in this death penalty trial, the PD didn't have the video editing software and everything else. I had a video business at the time doing like depositions. So I cut down all the video at home. Rape, torture, murder videos at home. It got so strenuous that literally I had a panic attack in my shower and my ex-wife had to come remove me from the shower. I don't know how the PD found out about it, but their solution was, we're going to send another detective over to sit with you while you're documenting this at your house. So I did. We get ready for this death penalty trial. I've got to present the videos, and they redacted a ton, but they closed the courtroom because of how horrific these videos were. I testified to it on the stand. I'm crying because it was so horrific. At the conclusion of the trial, they get counselors for all the jurors because of how horrific it was. Never once for us. It's no wonder I'm here. I'm not mad. Let's change it. And that's only a few things, Jeremy. I'm not sitting here trying to bash independence. I'm going to give people the behind the scenes look of what actually goes on. How do you go from, I don't know how I want to say this. I had sexual trauma when I was a child involving a youth leader. Years later, I'm doing child pornography cases. I'm getting youth pastors. I'm getting Boy Scout leaders. I'm getting prominent government officials. I'm getting active duty Navy guys. I am getting all these things, but we had a really bad homicide where the pastor of New Hope Baptist was having an affair with one of his members and went down to the insurance agency on Nolan Road and executed him. Wife shows up on scene and she's despondent over her husband being killed. Pastor shows up to comfort her and we begin our investigation. I was in a police supervisor course because I was about to be promoted when this homicide occurred. I'm out at Blue River Police Academy. I get pulled on day 2, and I'm told because I was so good at writing search warrants, I was needed. So I don't question it. I'm like, hey, I'm in the supervisor class. Like, you're fine. I'll catch you up. At the end of that week, I got my certificate. Never training. But we go down this path of conflicting, man, because you have a pastor who cold-blooded murdered this guy. He did the eulogy at his funeral. I'm sitting there. We're recording the funeral because we figured the suspect's going to show up, right? There's the pastor. How do you wrap your head around stuff like that? And then you're supposed to go back to church on Sunday and praise God. That's why I said early on in this, I don't know if you're recording or not. Mm-hmm. I've wrestled with God my whole life. I'm going to. I think that's part of our journey. But when you don't have the resources, so 2017, I start working on me. I went to EAP, and let me tell you my experience. I get hooked up with somebody over in Kansas. They're like 30 minutes late to the appointment. I walk in, and I'm like, literally within a couple days prior to that, I'd walked in, and this lady I knew was sliced to pieces. And when officers arrived, the husband was having sex with the corpse. And the kids are, dad's in custody. Grandpa gets saddled with them. And I'm not saying this to the feel good shit, but the cops I worked with, the heart of who they are, we all pitched in. Cops are the most resourceful people along with firefighters. We found somebody's family sold beds. We got them beds. We got everything we could because it was so horrific. These kids showed up at school with blood on them after witnessing mom dead. Drew pictures. We got no counseling. The point I'm making, there are red flags. They're being ignored in independence. I can't speak to other agencies in my journey. I'm going to find out firsthand. And I have a sick feeling that it's this way across the nation for police and fire. What do you say to all that?
I don't know, man. That's, unfortunately, you're right. It is this way across the nation. Now, and like I said earlier, though, there's a lot of, departments that are doing it better and they're making progress, but there's still a lot stuck in the past. And it's pretty easy to see which departments those are.
It is, but honestly, it kind of feels like a cattywomple with how they do things, man, because It's like, okay, they paid out money for a workers' comp claim. The city is self-insured. That came out of their budget. I know that 2 other officers, because we had the same attorney, settled also. I don't know what they had. There's a lot of money. And it wasn't about me being rich. Since my divorce, we made a lot of sacrifices to be able to do what we're doing now. But from 2017 on, my mental health journey, I paid for every aspect of my mental health, my meds, everything. I had to take sick leave to go to Warriors Ascent because I was told command staff thought I was using PTSD as an excuse.
Yeah. Well, I mean, look, here's the thing. Most cities and most departments, they're not going to be proactive.
Mm.
They will wait because they don't believe that it is a widespread problem. So by being proactive, you nip it in the bud. Well, we're going to catch all these people over here that really don't need this or whatever. Well, yeah, but look at this population that does.
Yeah.
And you're going to throw away these however many officers or firefighters because you don't want to spend a little bit. I mean, look, whenever I went through treatment, it was $80,000.
Oh, yeah.
Just for me.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know how many other people that I know that have been through either that program or another one that costs that much or more?
I agree.
You spend half that to put a program together and you just nipped all that shit in the bud.
No, you're right.
You save money in the long run.
We have the money as a country. It's not a priority. It's going to have to be. And not to get into politics and all that, because honestly, I've avoided politics my whole life. Growing up, my parents weren't political. I remember I lived in California at the time, and Ronald Reagan was running for president, and I walked up to the De Anza College where he was speaking. That was my only exposure to politics. And then as a cop, we couldn't have yard signs. We couldn't be vocal because there's such stringent social media rules. You are muzzled so much, you can't address the problems that I'm going to. Because if I did this when I was working, I would have gotten fired. They would have found a way. And that's the reality of it.
Yeah.
There's whistleblower protections, not for first responders.
Nah, and those are only protections some of the time. But
I had 2 times in my career, and I can say this. One time was a police chief. I had to testify in federal court that he lied. I worked later underneath his son. I can absolutely say his son, professional. Did not treat me, you know how uncomfortable that was, though? Second one was a detective from another agency, and it involved a homicide. And I had to get up in Jackson County and say he lied. This is what actually happened. My entire career, my word was my honor. I may not have done the best things, but my word was my honor. And I'm giving my word now. I will die trying to make change. Because it has to happen.
well, hopefully you don't die making change.
Yeah. I mean, this is going to be the flag I carry until I retire. I'm proud of my service now. I'm proud that I'm able to have a dog because a lot of people don't have that ability. I'm proud I get to go travel and do things. A lot of people don't have that ability. It's the blessing in the wound. It's the gift in the wound because how I got here is ugly. But what I do with it now is up to me.
Well, dude, like I said, I am looking forward to it. So
can I plug by the time, when is this going to go on?
This would be probably about a month or so.
Perfect. By that time, my socials will be up and running. Healing Trails Overland. YouTube, Facebook, Instagram. I don't know about anything else because I'm just going to kind of see where it goes.
Get a TikTok, Boomer.
No, don't get a TikTok.
No, see, I'm looking at I'm working with a really close friend of mine who's got production background, him and his wife. Looking at the metrics, I'm like, I'm not even going to get into that hot mess. You get 1 million views, but I don't care about that. I don't care about the views. The views I get, I want to be meaningful.
Final thoughts, James.
Oh, finally I haven't clicked over to me yet today. And I've just been kind of like zoned out. Not like.
Yeah, no, I think you were taking a nap there for a little while.
No, I was just like kind of hanging over here, just watching. I don't know. It was just one of those episodes where I'm like, I just wanted to like listen. Like, I don't really have shit to say other than cops suck and get a TikTok. But
I mean, I have to say this just because, like, I love firefighters. My wife's a firefighter. But you guys know you're second responders. Like, here's the deal. Here's the deal. The scene is safe, then you come in. Like, it's cool. I'm cool with it. You be cool with it. Like, we're good.
Oh, I'm not going to argue. It's first to the girl, second to the scene. We all know that.
Thank you. Thank you. But no, I told this story when I taught the building resilience, surviving secondary trauma to the fire department. And the statute of limitations up and he's dead. So I can tell the story. I'm sitting there, and one of the first classes I had to teach, there's a guy named David Jameson. He was an independent firefighter. He was like the only black firefighter they had. And it was like 2000, 2001. Nolan Road was a big thing. Everybody's cruising, and we were out there doing enforcement. It was chaos. I get in a fight, and there was a local Samoan family that was well known to us. And I'm trying to arrest the guy, and it's not going well. And he has me on my back, and he's beating the shit out of me. And I see out of the corner of my eye, help's coming, but I see out of the corner of my eye this flash of movement. And as I look, I see David Jameson, who I didn't know before that. I see this big black firefighter running at me. And he boots the guy in the face, gets him off me, disappears. I get him handcuffed, and I'm like, what the hell? Like, he saved my bacon. Like, I don't know how that would have gone. So I didn't tell Soul because I ran into a firefighter. I asked him, like, who is this dude? And they're like, his name's Dave. Don't say anything. We don't want him to get in trouble. So I don't say anything for years. He's sitting in this class. I tell the story. And his driver's sitting there. And his driver's like, I remember this. Dave's sitting back and he's like, nah, dog, I don't remember this. And I'm like, come on. I talked to him after class. He wouldn't give it up. He's like, I don't remember nothing. Fast forward, about a year after that, I started going up to the station, and I started seeing the family conversations that you guys have around the table. And he and I sat down, and as a white cop, we started talking about race. We started talking about tough subjects. And he invited me to every Friday, the Independence people, or it's like Steak Friday. He was like, nah, we're doing catfish. That's kind of what he was known for. He died on duty. It was a heart attack. And the impact that man had on me, and I loved my firefighters from then on. And I saw how close over the years us working together, and when we're in the thick of it, they jump in at their own cost. So there's a lot of razzing that goes back and forth, but I love you guys. You guys, we couldn't do our job without you guys.
And we can definitely do ours without you.
People love you guys, man. Here's the thing. You guys,
Jesus, James. Come on, man.
James, right before I retired, we had done a car stop, and we found a Kansas City Fire Department badge, which is a local agency here. And I'm like, man, somebody got their car broken into, missed this. And the station down there off Sterling, down like 47th and Sterling, just south of there. I show up to give this badge. It was the most iconic fire department ever. I walk in. There are dudes sitting there playing PlayStation. There are legitimately cookies being made. I can smell cookies. There's a dude working out, and somebody was asleep in the recliner. And I'm like, I fucked up. That was the first time I admitted it. And I was like, 22 years at that point. I'm like, these guys show up, and girls, people generally love them. What the hell did I choose? And any cop that has been on any amount of time is going to tell you this. They screwed up, or they're a liar. Straight up. It's the best career profession in the world, but in today's environment, I couldn't tell anybody to do it. So Yep. My buddy John always tells me every time we leave, man, he's like, let's go change the world. I thought that was the corniest thing ever until this dream came to light. Dude, it's possible. Not the world, but a section of it. That's why I'm here.
Well, brother, I'm beyond appreciative, honored to sit here and hear your story and listen to that. And even when we do talk shit back and forth, I can only imagine what it's like in your own home when you chose to marry up. But
it is marrying up.
But and Jeremy knows there's been plenty of high horses I've got on, and I'm not even gonna call yours a high horse, but just this the cause. They're like, no, fuck this. We're done with this. This shit's getting fixed. I'm tired of it. And it seems in the beginning you're like, oh yeah, this makes sense. Everybody should want this. And then you get to the reality of it and like, are you, what do you mean? It's like, we're going drinking to the quad, you and who, everybody, they're not there, but
it's honestly, it's the insanity of it. I've told my wife and friends this, that when I left the PD and I started working on myself harder than I had, you feel like you're coming out of a cult, because I've never been in a cult, just to say that. I've done a lot of training on cults because we've had some weird cases over the years, but it feels like you're in a cult because it's, come here. He's getting social. You're conditioned to do more with less. I say that when we started the cybercrimes unit, we went to the department with a hell of a plan, man. We're like, we want 3 computers, undercover line. This is what we're going to do. They're like, man, that sounds awesome. We don't have the money. So me and my 2 partners went to Best Buy in Independence, the store manager there at the time. I was like, here's what we're going to do. The department isn't supporting this. He sold us 3 computers for $1 each. Those 3 computers lived the entire time I was in Special Victims Unit. We did, I'd say easily over 150 search warrants based off these $1 computers. We saved real kids, and we've always done more with less. They got to start putting up. They got to start investing into the people who are out here making the choice to try to save the public, to try to stand that line. Because as first responders, we don't get paid to lose. Who do we call if we can't figure it out? Maybe the military, if it's bad enough. But you look at something like the parade shooting. It wasn't the military. It was first responders that ran to that. And as somebody with PTSD that got retired, immediately I'm like, man, no way. This is why I don't go to crowds. And then you start thinking of the mental health of everybody affected by that, of having a beautiful day, enjoying the celebration to suddenly gunfire. Then the media wants to talk about this to get ratings. They don't truly care about it. The first responders are going to carry that. We talked about that before this. They're going to carry that the rest of their lives. My wife was down there, and she mutual aid, and she worked on a victim. She's not going to remember. She's never going to forget that. My opinion of this happened not because of loose gun laws, not because of anything else. It's because of the lack of prosecution in Jackson County. Criminals know that they can operate without punity in Jackson County. Because you look at some of the surrounding agencies and the prosecution they get, a guy will go to, if you live out in Lexington and you have your 3rd driving while suspended, you get put in prison. The number of times we have gone on shootings, and before the victim is put in the ambulance, we've gotten a FU or a dismissal of charges signed because they're going to handle it themselves. I tried to find today the most iconic picture to sum up policing right now, and I'll send it to you. You probably can't put it out. It's not very great. He's covered in blood. He'd been stabbed by his brother. We're there to try to help. He's hanging on to life, and he's laying on the gurney at center point, flipping off the camera because F you cops. That is policing now.
Hmm.
You are hated for the uniform you wear. People don't want to hear this. Some of it's legit hate because there are groups that, in my opinion, laws have affected adversely their entire lives. We have to rewrite this system. We have to rewrite this political thing, or we're headed as a country in a very bad place. So I'll shut up because I'll keep going, but this has to be more than just conversation. We need to have somebody step forward that has the balls to start doing something about it. We're also worried about failure. We don't try anything. Let's try something and then shift and pivot.
Yeah, it's time for action.
It is.
So, and I've said that several times. So I agree with you 100%. So, John, thanks for coming by, man. This was fantastic. I can't wait to see what you have in store for everybody. And whenever you start putting content out, I know I'll be watching.
It's going to be terrifying, but fun. So I'm grateful.
So everybody check him out, Instagram, all that stuff. I'll put the link in the
Cool.
in the thing. So look, if you're struggling, reach out. There are resources out there. If you know somebody that's struggling, reach out. Let them know that you care. Let them know what resources are out there. As always, we have an operational email. Email us if you don't know what your resources are. If we don't know, we'll figure it out. So yeah, thanks for stopping by. See you next time.